The day the HOA tried to block my boat access was the day I decided I was done playing nice. My name's Karen. I'm a 42-year-old mechanic who's been living in the small lakeside community of Fairhollow Shores for over a decade. I bought the house for one reason: the lake. I fish, I boat, and when I'm not fixing engines, I'm out there on the water clearing my head. That dock behind my house, it's been mine since I moved in. Deeded access, fully legal, but then came Patricia Elwood. Patricia, the newly elected president of the HOA, was exactly the kind of woman who'd knock on your door just to complain about the color of your mailbox. Short blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a voice that could slice through drywall. She moved in 6 months ago and somehow climbed her way to the top of the HOA board faster than you could say power trip. It started with a letter official looking, stamped with the HOA logo. "Dear Mr. Karen," it read, "after reassessing community shoreline access, it has come to our attention that your boat dock is extending into shared lakefront property. You are hereby required to remove the dock and cease all private boating activity effective immediately." I laughed at first. Then I reread it. Then I got mad. I grabbed my deed. Still said exclusive lake access. Clear as day. I'd paid extra for that. I even had photos from when I bought the place showing the dock already there, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I walked over to the HOA office, which was just a converted shed next to the clubhouse, and knocked. Patricia opened the door with that fake smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. "Isaac," she said slowly, like she was talking to a child. "If this is about the dock, we're just trying to ensure equal access for all residents." "You mean the fishing club," I said. "The one you started last month that meets every Saturday." "The one with 20 members who keep casting lines from my shoreline. They're paying HOA dues like everyone else," she said, crossing her arms. "That dock is on association land now. We voted." "You can't vote away a deed," I snapped. She waved a hand. "Well, maybe not. But we can fine you for non-compliance. Starting next week, $50 a day." I stared at her. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she said. "Oh, and we'll be informing the county about your unauthorized structure." I walked away before I said something I'd regret, but I wasn't done. Not even close. See, what Patricia didn't know is that I had a copy of the HOA bylaws, and I'd actually read them. I also had something better: an old friend at the county records office, and a paper trail of everything she and her fishing club had been up to, and if she wanted to play hardball. I'd shut down their entire fishing season. By the following morning, I had already filed a formal records request at the county clerk's office. My friend Lyle had worked there for almost 20 years. When I showed up with coffee and a copy of the HOA's letter, he raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. He pulled the original plat maps, land use agreements, and the shoreline easement documents. Everything confirmed what I already knew: my dock was on my property. No overlap, no gray area. "That's your land, Isaac," he said, running a finger along the dotted line. "HOA has no authority here. If they're claiming otherwise, they're bluffing or worse." "Worse," I said, tapping the edge of the document. "They're telling other residents that the shoreline is common property. They're hosting events on my lot." He snapped his gum and leaned back in his chair. "You want me to flag it?" I nodded. "Flag it, and I want a certified copy. If they come after me legally, I want to be 5 steps ahead." 2 days later, I attended the HOA's monthly board meeting. They held it in the community clubhouse, a single-story building with mismatched chairs and a coffee urn that hadn't been cleaned since the Bush administration. I sat in the back, keeping quiet, while Patricia stood at the podium rambling about shoreline beautification efforts and increased member participation in lakefront activities. Then she said something that shifted everything. "This year, we've voted to designate the east shoreline, including the dock area, for shared recreational use. We've submitted a usage change to the county and expect approval soon." I raised my hand. She hesitated, then gestured toward me like she was doing me a favor. "Isaac." "Briefly, please." You submitted a usage change on property you don't own, I said. Did you even check the land records? A few heads turned. Patricia's jaw tightened. We acted in good faith. The HOA has an obligation to provide access to all residents. And you don't think forging a usage claim on someone else's deeded land is overstepping? Whispers broke out across the room. A man in the front row turned to his wife and mumbled something about overreach. Patricia clenched the edge of the podium. The matter is settled, she said sharply. We've voted. I stood up and walked to the front. Then every vote you took based on that false claim is invalid. I have certified copies of the original plats. The dock's on my land and your fishing club's been trespassing. Several people shifted uncomfortably. One board member, a retired dentist named Carl, rubbed his temple and muttered, "Oh, hell." Patricia forced a laugh. Isaac, we can resolve this without drama. You should have thought of that before you lied to 30 homeowners and misused association funds to build benches and signage on private land. Her face flushed. That's not how this board operates. I pulled out my phone. Want to hear the voicemail you left for the vendor last week? The one where you told him to just put the benches near the mechanic's dock because nobody will notice. The silence in the room was so thick someone could have dropped a pin and it would have echoed. Carl leaned in. You recorded her? Sure did. Georgia's a one-party consent state, and I already forwarded it to the county zoning commission. Patricia suddenly ended the meeting. The next few days were chaos. Word spread fast. Several residents approached me privately, saying they'd been pressured into voting for the shoreline reallocation because they thought it was legal. One woman, Evelyn, showed me an email from Patricia that outright claimed the HOA had already obtained the new usage rights, which was a flat-out lie. That was enough for me to escalate. I scheduled a meeting with the county zoning enforcement office. When I handed over the full packet voice recordings, plats, emails, and photos of the HOA's unauthorized structures, they didn't ask many questions. They just asked if I'd be willing to testify. I said yes. Meanwhile, I filed a complaint with the state's Office of Homeowner Association Oversight. Turns out, Patricia had submitted the usage change using forged documentation. Her filing listed a community vote with signatures from residents, only half of which checked out. A few homeowners had no idea their names were on it, the icing on the cake. One of the benches the HOA installed had been paid for using funds earmarked for storm drain maintenance. That's misappropriation. By the end of the week, 2 auditors from the state showed up at the HOA office with clipboards and sealed envelopes. They spent hours combing through receipts, meeting minutes, and correspondence. Patricia tried to bar them from the financial records room, but the auditors handed her a letter from the Attorney General's office authorizing a full inspection. She stepped aside, but not before giving me a look like she'd swallowed a lemon. Then came Saturday. The fishing club showed up at sunrise, hauling coolers and rods, ready for their weekly meet-up. I was already outside, arms crossed, waiting. You're going to need to pack it up, I told them. One guy, Randy, looked confused. What? Patricia said we could fish off the dock. Not anymore. The county issued a cease and desist. This shoreline's off limits until they finish the investigation. Any fishing activity here and you're trespassing. A few grumbled, but most of them just turned around and left. Randy lingered, then sighed. She said you didn't have a leg to stand on. I held up the certified land plat. I've got both feet planted legally. He left without another word. The following Monday, I got a call from Deputy Sorensen of the county sheriff's office. He asked if I could come down and make a formal statement. Turns out, someone had tipped them off that Patricia had altered HOA documents before submitting them to the state. When I arrived, he laid it out clearly. She filed a false public declaration using forged signatures and misrepresented ownership on a legal land use form. That's a felony. I leaned back. What happens next? We'll be issuing a subpoena for the HOA's digital records. If it checks out, she could be facing charges for fraud and falsifying official documents. Sounds like fishing season's over, I said. He didn't laugh, but I could tell he wanted to. The next board meeting was packed. People stood along the walls and sat on folding chairs brought from the clubhouse storage. Patricia didn't show. Carl, now acting president, stood at the podium with trembling hands and announced her resignation for personal reasons. He also read a prepared statement from the county confirming that all shoreline usage claims made by the HOA were officially nullified pending investigation. I raised my hand. Carl hesitated, but then nodded. Mr. Conley, I'd like to propose a motion, I said, that all future HOA decisions involving property boundaries require notarized verification from the county before being presented to residents. Applause broke out. Someone shouted, "Amen to that." Carl banged the gavel once, but he was smiling. Motion recorded. As I walked out that night, a few neighbors clapped me on the back. Others just nodded. I didn't need a parade, I just wanted my dock, my peace, and an HOA that followed the law. One of the kids from down the street rode by on his bike and pointed at my yard. "Hey, Mr. Conley, my dad said you made the HOA eat their own bait." I laughed for the first time in weeks. "Tell your dad I said thanks." The lake was quiet the next morning. No fishing groups, no folding chairs, no strangers tossing beer cans into the reeds. Just the water, the breeze, and the dock I never should have had to defend in the first place. And from that moment on, every time I cast a line, it wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about taking back what was mine. By midweek, I was back in my garage rebuilding the carburetor on a '72 Charger when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I wiped my hands on a rag and let it ring. Then it buzzed again, voicemail. I hit play and heard a voice I didn't recognize, but the message was clipped and tense. "Mr. Conley, this is Special Investigator Redding with the State Attorney's Office. We'd like to speak with you regarding recent filings by the Fair Hello Shores Homeowners Association. Please return the call at your earliest convenience." I paused, set the carburetor down, and sat on the edge of my workbench. The attorney's office? That wasn't just zoning violations anymore. When Redding picked up, he didn't waste time. "We've opened a criminal investigation into the HOA's executive board," he said. "It appears several documents submitted to the state contain forged signatures and falsified financial statements." "I figured as much," I said. "But I thought the county was handling it. They flagged it and passed it to us. What you uncovered triggered a wider audit. We've found irregularities stretching back 5 years. We're now examining potential wire fraud, misuse of fiduciary responsibility, and conspiracy to defraud residents." "Conspiracy?" I asked. "Let's just say this isn't about a dock anymore. We'd like to meet." We scheduled a meeting at the Regional Legal Enforcement Office 2 counties over. When I arrived that Friday, Redding and another investigator named Kira sat me down in a conference room with a file already open on the table. She slid over a photo. It was a spreadsheet showing HOA dues collected over several years. One column had been digitally altered, some entries overwritten to reduce the amount listed. The original records, Kira explained, had been recovered from a cloud backup the board didn't know was still syncing. "See here," she said, tapping the screen. "This entry shows a $4,800 deposit for community landscaping, but the original ledger shows only $900 was spent on actual services. The rest was moved into a private account belonging to Patricia Elwood." "That's embezzlement," I said. "Among other things," Redding added. "We've identified 3 shell accounts. At least 2 other board members appear involved." I leaned back. "You think they were using community events to launder the funds?" "We know they were. There's a trail from vendor contracts to fake invoices." The fishing club was just a smokescreen, an easy excuse to host budgeted events and shuffle money. It made sense now. The sudden push for shoreline use, the benches, the signs, it had nothing to do with access. It was about justifying expenses they could funnel. Redding reached into the folder and pulled out a printed email. "This was sent by Patricia to a contractor 3 months ago," he said. She wrote, "Keep the invoice under 5,000. HOA doesn't require secondary approval below that threshold. Bill it as shoreline safety." I shook my head. "So what happens next? We're issuing warrants, and we'll need you to testify again." The grand jury convened the following month. I wasn't the only one called. Evelyn, the elderly neighbor who'd shown me the email, testified too. So did Carl, who, to his credit, had turned over his laptop the moment the investigation started. By then, the neighborhood was a powder keg. HOA fees had been suspended temporarily, and the board's authority was frozen by a judicial injunction. Without their usual grip on the community, residents started talking more openly. A group of homeowners, including a retired postal inspector named Linda, formed an interim coalition to keep things organized and transparent. Linda came by one evening with a binder full of old newsletters and financial reports she'd saved. "I always had a bad feeling about Patricia," she said, flipping through dated printouts. "She had that look like someone who'd print their own business cards before being elected." Inside the binder were 2 newsletters from 3 years ago listing expenses for emergency shoreline reinforcements. But the lake had been calm that year, no storms, no flooding. And the records showed a $22,000 payout to a company that didn't exist. I called Redding again. He replied, "We already pulled that thread. That company traces back to a P.O. box registered under a different board member's sister's name. We're adding wire fraud and mail fraud to the list." The trial date was set for early spring. In the meantime, residents petitioned to dissolve the current HOA charter entirely. Over 2/3 of the neighborhood signed. They wanted a full reset, but Patricia wasn't going down quietly. A week before the trial, I found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name typed. Inside was a single sheet with a typed message. "You've made powerful enemies. Best to leave it alone now." I took it straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Sorensen took one look and said, "We'll run it for prints. If this is intimidation related to an open case, it becomes a criminal offense." I wasn't afraid, but I was done being polite. I installed 3 new motion-activated cameras around my property, one on the dock, one facing the road, one aimed at my garage. I also added a floodlight that would trigger the second a car stopped near my driveway. 2 nights later, it caught a figure creeping near my fence line. Hood up, flashlight in hand, the footage was time-stamped and clear. I turned the full video over to the sheriff's office. By morning, they had ID'd the trespasser, an HOA treasurer named Darryl Meeks. That got him arrested on the spot. Attempted witness intimidation. By the time trial began, the courtroom was packed. News crews showed up. Apparently, a homeowners association funneling tens of thousands in dues into fake companies and threatening residents had made the local papers. The prosecution laid out everything: the forged documents, the phantom invoices, the rigged votes, and the targeted harassment. I gave my testimony under oath, detailing the threats, the misuse of my property, and the fake vote on shoreline access. Patricia sat at the defense table, arms crossed, wearing a gray blazer that looked 3 sizes too stiff. She didn't look at me once. The final blow came when the prosecution introduced an audio recording from a board meeting no one knew had been recorded. In it, Patricia could be heard saying, "No one reads the fine print. If we show them a map and say it's community land, they'll believe it." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Patricia was sentenced to 6 years for fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of public documents. Darryl got 3 for attempted witness tampering and aiding in the embezzlement. Another board member, Susan, was given probation and fines after cooperating fully and returning part of the stolen funds. By summer, the new community charter was in place. The HOA was restructured under an oversight committee with quarterly audits and full transparency. Board members could no longer serve more than 2 consecutive terms, and any vote involving property boundaries required notarized verification and public hearings. Linda was elected chair of the new board. One of her first acts was to designate my dock as a protected individual easement permanently recorded in the bylaws. "Consider it a thank you," she said, handing me the official notice, "for saving this community from turning into a racket." I didn't need thanks. I just wanted my lake back. That weekend, I took the boat out for the first time in months. The water was calm. A couple of kids were skipping stones off the opposite shore. No noise, no flyers. No one trying to plant signs in my grass. As I cast my line, I saw the new HOA sign posted across the clubhouse lawn. It read, "Fair Hello Shores governed by residents, not bullies." I reeled in slowly, watching the sun glint off the water. Justice wasn't a clean fight. But when the dust settled, I still had my dock and they had matching mugshots. The lake was peaceful again, but I wasn't naive enough to think peace lasted without effort. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. The trial had taken a toll on everyone. Residents were still cautious, unsure if things would truly change. And while Patricia and her crew were either behind bars or under strict legal supervision, a few of their sympathizers still lurked in the shadows, clinging to what little influence they had left. I didn't care much about their whispers. What I cared about was that people had stopped looking over their shoulders before speaking. The air in Fair Hello Shores felt lighter, but the deeper issues, those were just starting to surface. One morning, about 2 weeks after the new board was voted in, Linda rang my doorbell. She stood there with a weathered folder and a look that told me I wasn't getting back to my carburetor anytime soon. "We've got another problem," she said, stepping inside before I could ask. "And this one runs deeper." She dropped the folder on my dining table. Inside were scanned pages, bank records, contractor agreements, and something that made my stomach tighten. A permit request for shoreline dredging, dated 3 years ago, bearing a forged signature from the county environmental office. "Where did this come from?" I asked. A resident cleaning out her garage found a box of old HOA paperwork. It belonged to her husband, who was briefly on the board before he passed. "She gave it to me when she saw your name come up in one of the memos." I flipped through the documents. The permit request was for a minor dredging operation to improve water circulation. But the coordinates listed didn't match any community spaces. They matched a protected wetland zone at the far north end of the lake, behind a row of homes that had suspiciously increased in value over the past 2 years. "You're telling me they tampered with a conservation area?" "Worse," Linda said. "We reached out to the county. According to their records, no such permit was ever granted. That means the work was done illegally, and if you look at the contractor listed." I scanned the name. Holleridge Development Services? They're not a dredging company. They're a private land prep firm. They specialize in clearing out buildings, flattening lots, and relocating soil for cash. I stared at her. "That land is supposed to be untouched. It's government protected, exactly." "Which means someone's going to prison." Again. The next step was clear. We took the documents straight to the County Environmental Crimes Unit. This wasn't just HOA mismanagement anymore. This was ecological damage, and the state didn't play games when it came to wetlands. Detective Fallon from the Environmental Enforcement Division met with us the next day. She was sharp, young, and didn't waste words. "You're saying the HOA illegally contracted a dredge on protected land and falsified a county permit to cover it?" "Yes," Linda said. "And they used resident dues to do it." Fallon narrowed her eyes. "Do either of you know who signed off on payment?" I nodded. "Patricia and 2 of her former board members." But the money was funneled through a third party, this Holleridge outfit. Fallon's team launched a formal investigation that week. They visited the site with forensic geologists and surveyed the damage. What they found was worse than we imagined. Not only had the wetlands been dredged, but they'd also dumped the displaced soil on the opposite end of the lake, burying a small cove that had been home to a nesting heron colony for decades. That pushed the case to the federal level. The EPA got involved, and suddenly the HOA's crimes weren't just community scandals, they were federal offenses. Carl stopped by my garage a few days after the initial investigation started. He looked worn down, like he'd aged a year in a week. "I didn't know about the dredging," he said. "I swear. I joined the board after that mess." "I believe you," I said, "but people are going to ask why no one caught it." He nodded slowly, then pulled out a folded document. "That's why I'm resigning. I've got no business leading anything anymore, but I did find something." It was a handwritten ledger. Not digital, not something that could be wiped. It listed payments from the HOA to various vendors over a 3-year stretch. Some names matched real businesses. Others were clearly fake. One stuck out: Lakeside Ecological Solutions. There were 5 payments made to it, sums just under $4,000 each. "The address listed for this company doesn't exist," Carl said. "I think it's a shell." We turned the ledger over to Fallon. She confirmed it was enough to fast-track subpoenas for financial records tied to the HOA's account. Within days, they traced a trail of checks from the association to a bank in North Carolina, one that held accounts under false business names. All roads led back to Patricia and a third accomplice they hadn't caught yet, a man named Edwin Rusk. Rusk had never lived in HOA Shores, but he owned the dredging equipment used on the wetlands and had been paid in cash. His connection: he was Patricia's cousin. And he'd been running off-grid construction jobs for years. Fallon's team tracked him down in a rural area outside Asheville. When they raided his property, they found more than dredging equipment. They found detailed logs of every illegal job he'd done with Patricia's help. HOA Shores was just one of 6 neighborhoods they'd targeted with fake permits and kickbacks. The charges piled up. Patricia was brought back from prison for a new trial. This time, she faced federal charges: environmental destruction, fraud against the government, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes across state lines. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, and this time the judge didn't hold back. Patricia was sentenced to an additional 15 years in federal prison. Rusk got 12. The third board member involved in the dredging scheme took a plea deal and agreed to testify in exchange for 5 years and restitution. The EPA ordered a full restoration of the damaged wetland, funded by the seizure of all personal assets from the convicted parties. The lake was declared a monitored site, and a conservation trust was established to protect it indefinitely, with funds drawn from the recovered HOA accounts. As for HOA Shores, we didn't rebuild the HOA, we dismantled it completely. The community voted to transition to a neighborhood committee, purely advisory with no enforcement power. Linda was elected to chair it, and the first thing she did was hold a public forum. Every single decision would be made out in the open, with voting records transparent and published. People started coming together in ways we hadn't seen in years. I helped a few neighbors build their own small docks legally, with permits and boundaries respected. A retired contractor down the road started teaching kids how to fish off the public pier. We even held a lake cleanup day. Not because anyone ordered it, but because people wanted to. The herons came back that season, nesting in a smaller colony, but they came back. One morning, Linda stopped by with a framed certificate. The county had issued a commendation for citizenship in defense of environmental integrity. My name was on it. "I figured it belonged in your shop," she said, handing it over. "Thanks," I said, setting it on the shelf above my workbench. "But I didn't do it for this." "I know," she said. "That's why it matters." The lake was glass still as we stood in the doorway. No noise, no meetings, no power-hungry board breathing down our necks, just water, wind, and the quiet sound of justice settling in. HOA Shores had been through hell, but we came out of it wiser, stronger, and finally free.